This is Aqua Diary, an exploration of lakes, drinking water, water policy, environmental shifts, and the mysteries that live beneath the surface. I'm Allie, I'm an environmental scientist, and each week we'll look at what's happening with our water, from headlines to hidden science, to the strange stories lakes have carried for generations. Because water isn't just a resource, it's a system, it has a story to tell, and it affects all of us. This is Aqua Diary. Hi everyone, welcome back to Aqua Diary. I'm Allie, and today we're getting into something that affects every single person who lives near a lake, a river, or a city, or drinks water, which is most of us. We're talking about stormwater and how stormwater can cause raw sewage to go directly into your lakes or rivers. You may have heard the term before, maybe in a news story about a beach closure or a fish kill after a big storm. But today we're going to go a little bit deeper than the headline so you can really understand the fundamentals. At the end of this episode, you'll understand why lakes kind of get dirtier after it rains, why some communities end up with sewage spilling directly into their waterways, and what your local stormwater system is actually doing or failing to do. If you caught episode 1, you already have a head start. We did cover stormwater as part of the water cycle in some pretty deep detail, but don't worry if you missed it, because we're going to build on everything you need right here. Let's start by setting the scene. Picture a forest during a rainstorm. Rain hits the trees, drips down into the soil, and most of it soaks straight into the ground. Trees might use it, it might filter slowly into the groundwater, or it might find its way into a nearby stream. It's a system that's been quietly working for millions of years. Now picture a city, the same rainstorm, but the ground is now covered in concrete, asphalt, and rooftops. That rain has nowhere else to go. It can't soak in, so it runs. Scientists call this kind of flow runoff, or stormwater runoff. And as it runs off the land, it picks things up with it. It can be dirt, sediment, trash, plastic, cigarette butts, you name it. But it also gets a little bit more concerning, because every time it rains, runoff also collects fertilizers and pesticides from lawns, oil and grease from roads and parking lots, and animal waste from everywhere and anywhere. And at the more alarming end, heavy metals. That could be zinc from tire wear, copper from brake pads, lead from old paint that's long peeled off sheds and homes. These things don't just go away, they have to go somewhere, and they accumulate wherever they end up. And the faster the stormwater moves, which it does because pavement offers zero resistance, the more it can carry, and the harder it hits whatever it empties into. A 2019 study by the U.S. Geological Survey and the EPA looked at 50 stormwater samples from 21 sites across 17 different states. The researchers were testing for chemicals. The mean number of different chemicals they found, 73 per site in a single storm. And at some sites, the number climbed as high as 103 different kinds of chemicals. Some of these chemicals they found are also surprising. The most common thing they found was pesticides, many of which are designed to kill insects, which we use everywhere. But what stood out was that some of the most commonly detected pesticides were ones that had been banned for decades. Chlordane, for example, banned in the United States in 1988, was still showing up in samples decades later. Because these compounds don't just disappear when we stop using them. They linger in the environment. They're hard to break down. They're really big compounds. And when it rains, they move. They also found pharmaceuticals, plasticizers, and weirdly enough, in every single sample, DEET. Yes, the bug spray. This is the critical point. Stormwater doesn't just smell bad or look bad. It's literally carrying a cocktail of pollutants directly into some of our drinking water sources, with no treatment, no filtration, no chance for soil or plants to take it in, use it, or break it down. According to the EPA, the presence of roads, rooftops, and other hard surfaces in urban areas means a typical city block can generate more than 5 times more stormwater runoff than a forested area of the same size. So when you compare natural systems to urban systems, the difference can be staggering. Forests absorb and clean water naturally. Cities generate pollution and runoff that flow directly into waterways that we later drink or swim in. This is huge. And before we go further, I need to give you one more term that's going to matter for the rest of this podcast. Impervious surfaces. An impervious surface is any surface that water cannot penetrate. Asphalt, concrete, rooftops, compacted soil, like when a truck drives over some wet soil and packs it down, parking lots. Basically, if rain lands on an impervious surface, water runs off instead of soaking in. The opposite, soil, grass, the forest floor, we call those pervious surfaces. Water can move through them and down into them. This distinction sounds simple, but the shift from pervious to impervious is one of the most significant things that happens when we develop land, because it doesn't just change where the water goes, it changes how fast it gets there and what it's carrying. In a natural system, water can move really slowly most of the time. It filters through the soil, gets taken up by plant roots, evaporates, and trickles gradually towards streams or rivers or lakes. We talked about this in episode 1. The whole system acts as a sponge, but when you pave over that sponge, the water has nowhere to go but down and out as far as gravity is willing to take it. And for a long time, we thought that was a good thing. In the mid-20th century, the Army Corps of Engineers and local governments across the country looked at flooding problems and thought, the solution is to get the water away as fast as possible. I don't know why they have an accent. So they straightened streams and ditches to make the water move faster. They lined waterways with concrete. The idea was to move stormwater out of cities as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And it worked in a narrow sense, pun intended. The water moved fast, but fast water is powerful water. The faster water moves, the more stuff it can pick up and carry. And what we didn't fully account for was what water does when it moves at that speed. It scours, it erodes, it cuts out the landscape. Straightened channels that once curved gently through a landscape began cutting deeper and deeper into their banks. Downstream communities that weren't flooding before suddenly were, and all of that sediment being ripped apart from the stream banks, that ends up in your lake too. Even today, we still see streams take out roadways after one heavy storm because the Army Corps thought it should take a 90-degree curve. And sometimes those things are due to these really old planning decisions that are still wreaking havoc on our community. We essentially solved one problem by creating 3 others, and the Army Corps is still sometimes guilty of doing this. The issue also runs a little bit deeper than that. As impervious surfaces like concrete increase, stormwater runoff increases, as you can imagine. And because of that, the water table can drop because less water is going back into the ground. Stream flows can become erratic, getting really deep and high levels of water and surges during storms, or really low flows during dry periods, and flooding can become more frequent and more severe. The good news is that we mostly recognize this now, and it's changed some in how we think about land development. If you've ever been to a local planning board meeting, which I have as a stormwater inspector, you may have noticed that many towns now require a minimum amount of permeable surface like grass before they'll even approve new construction for a home. The logic is simple. If you're adding more rooftops and parking lots or driveways, you have to account for where that water is going to go. And that's a really good thing, even though it tends to make some people pretty upset. But I think that's just because they don't understand this process, and that's not really their fault. The standards are also getting more precise. Not long ago, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or the New York State DEC, updated these guidelines to classify compacted gravel as an impervious surface. That might sound like a small thing, but it does matter. Compacted gravel, once you've got cars riding over it, looks like it should drain, but water doesn't actually move through it, and we didn't even know that until a couple of years ago. It runs straight off the surface, just like pavement. Recognizing things like that changes how development gets measured and regulated over time. This is why environmental scientists and city planners don't just look at a lake in isolation. They have to look at the land around it. By mapping land use across a watershed, which is the area surrounding a lake that drains into it, we can start to answer some fundamental questions. What is entering this lake, from where, and how much? A watershed that's mostly forested is going to behave very differently from one that's mostly developed. Forests are not just permeable, they're active. The vegetation can slow the water down, and when water slows down, it drops what it's carrying. Sediment will settle out. Nutrients might not travel as far and stay on the land, and the lake gets a much cleaner delivery. A developed watershed, on the other hand, gives you quite the opposite. Water moves fast, it carries a bunch of stuff, and it delivers it directly to the lake with nothing to filter it along the way. Nutrients, sediment, pollutants, everything. It's part of what drives the algae blooms, the murky water and the chemistry changes that can make a lake look sick. So how does any of this end up as sewage in your lake? This is where we need to talk about infrastructure, and yes, it gets worse. You might assume that the pipes under your city carrying sewage from your house and the pipes carrying stormwater from the streets are two completely different systems. In many places they are, but in a lot of communities across the United States, they're not. In those places, a single pipe carries both, and they're really common across the East Coast. These are called combined sewer systems, and they're exactly what they sound like, a combined network of pipes handling both the sewage from your toilets and sinks and the stormwater running off your streets. In dry weather, this is fine, and it works. Everything flows to the wastewater treatment plant, gets treated, and is discharged after it's cleaned. Here's the problem. When it rains heavily, the sheer amount of water ending up in that one pipe can be enormous. The pipes fill up, the treatment plant can't keep up, and when the system reaches capacity, the excess water has to go somewhere. Inside these combined sewer systems, sometimes there are outlets designed to release that overflow water before it backs up into your basement. When the water level in these pipes rises high enough, it spills over an internal barrier. It's kind of like a wall, and it goes out through a pipe that often leads directly to the nearest river or lake. In these cases, it doesn't even make it to the treatment plant. Raw sewage and stormwater end up directly into the water without any human oversight. This isn't always a decision that someone makes in the moment like a lot of us tend to think, and it's also not an accident. That's how the system was designed to work when overwhelmed, but you're right to think that's a major problem. These events, the discharge of raw sewage and stormwater mixed together, are called combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, and they're more common than most people know. So how common is this, and how much are we actually talking? Nationally, the EPA estimates there are roughly 700 communities across the United States with combined sewer systems. They're concentrated in some of the oldest cities in the country, so mostly the Northeast, the Great Lakes region, places that were built up before modern sewer design really existed. So New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago. These are cities with infrastructure that really predates our understanding of water pollution by a long shot. In New York State alone, there are 45 communities permitted to operate combined sewer systems, with approximately 800 outfalls statewide. Those outfalls are those regions where this water dumps out. To put that into perspective, New York City accounts for nearly half of all of those outfalls, 398 of them, discharging an average of 18 billion gallons of combined sewage every single year, just in one city. How often these discharges happen kind of varies by community, and varies by year based on how much rain we're getting. But many systems overflow multiple times a year. It happens in Auburn, New York as well, where I'm based and where much of my audience is from. Some overflow dozens of times, and what's coming out, again, isn't just dirty water. This is raw human sewage mixed with stormwater, including the pathogens and everything else that, wastewater treatment plants are specifically designed to remove, going straight into waterways without any treatment. So it's pretty common sense how this is a bad idea, right? So why do we have this system at all? Well, because it made sense at the time. Combined sewers were built mostly before 1900, when cities were growing really quickly and the goal was simple: get waste away from people as cheaply and as efficiently as possible. One pipe to carry everything seemed like a great solution at the time, and it was used in all these major cities across the country. The problem is now is that we've known better for 50 years that this is bad. By the 1970s, the damage to rivers and lakes was undeniable. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio famously caught fire in 1969, and the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. In 1994, the EPA issued a formal policy requiring communities with these combined sewer systems to develop long-term plans to fix them. So we are paying attention, but that was over 30 years ago. And most of these communities still have the same systems today. Because separating a combined sewer system means digging up your entire city and building a second network of pipes underground. That cost can run into the billions of dollars, and for many cities, that money simply hasn't come. It's not that nobody cares, it's just complicated, but it ought to be continued to be discussed, understood, and handled. This is the part that matters locally. The Great Lakes region and the Northeast are home to some of the oldest urban infrastructure in the entire country, but they're also home to 20% of the world's fresh water. So this means that they're home to some of the highest concentrations of combined sewer systems. This isn't some distant problem. This is major. For many communities in this region, it's happening now, and it has a direct impact on the lakes that people swim in, fish from, and drink from. And again, the Great Lakes region carries 20% of the world's fresh water. So let's trace what actually happens when water hits a lake. So one thing that arrives, as you can imagine, is nutrients. Stormwater can carry nitrogen and phosphorus picked up from fertilized lawns, from land upstream, and from sewage in the case of a CSO event. Lakes do need some nutrients to function, but there is a threshold. Cross it, and you get what scientists call eutrophication. Basically the overgrowth of algae that you see to the point where ecosystems can't really handle it. You've probably seen this. The water turns green or blue-green or sometime an unsettling shade of brown. That's often algae blooming. And while it might look like a surface problem, what's happening underneath is more serious. The algae can block sunlight from reaching plants deeper in the water that could otherwise compete with the harmful algae and take up those nutrients. And when the bloom dies and bacteria decompose it, that process consumes oxygen. In really severe cases, oxygen levels can drop so low that fish suffocate. The lake doesn't die loudly, it suffocates quietly, from the bottom up. Low oxygen can also cause even more nutrients to be released from the lake itself. There's a ton of new interesting research on this phenomena, and we'll dive into it more in our next episode. Alongside the nutrients comes sediment. Silt, clay, fine particles carried in the runoff. This is what makes the water turn cloudy after a heavy rain. We sometimes call these sediment plumes in the lake, and they can be massive. Sunlight also can't penetrate. Aquatic plants can't photosynthesize, and the whole web that depends on those plants can't struggle, and oftentimes algae outcompete the plants. But there's a second problem with sediment that's less obvious. Those particles can carry contaminants attached to their surface. Yes, there are some contaminants that literally stick themselves to sediment particles. And that could be heavy metals, organic chemicals, and then when the sediment settles to the lake bottom, it takes those pollutants with it, where they accumulate over time. And then there's the bacteria. Stormwater can carry bacteria from waste, and CSO events carry it directly from human sewage. When that enters a lake, bacteria levels can spike dramatically. This is why beaches close due to E. coli sometimes after storms. People swim in that water and get sick. Intestinal illnesses, ear infections, skin infections. It's a real and consistent public health impact that most people don't connect back to the rain that fell 2 days earlier. And then there are the direct toxins, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the other compounds that are toxic to life even at low concentrations. These don't just make fish sick, they affect fish reproduction. They can kill the fish eggs and damage the larvae of aquatic insects that form the base of that food web. And they accumulate in fish tissue over time, especially metals, which is partially why fish advisories exist in so many lakes and rivers. You ever heard of the mercury contamination issue? That's mostly due to acid rain, which will be another episode, but these things accumulate over time. Now here's something you should know if you live in New York. You have a legal right to be told when a combined sewer overflow event happens. In 2012, New York passed the Sewage Pollution Right to Know law, and it's considered one of the most comprehensive laws of its kind in the country. Under this law, when a sewage discharge occurs, the municipality or town responsible for it has to report it to the State Department of Environmental Conservation within 2 hours, and they have to notify the public within 4 hours of discovering it. These alerts go out through a system called NY Alert, and they're required to include the details like where the discharge happened, when it started, how long it lasted, and how much was released, often in gallons. The reason this matters is that before laws like this, these events often went unreported. People swam in contaminated water without even knowing it. They let their kids play at the beach after a storm, and nobody told them what had just entered that water. It's worth knowing that in New York, the DEC doesn't issue these alerts directly. The municipality or the town that owns the affected system does. And any decisions about whether there's a public health risk are made by the Department of Health, not the DEC. So if you want to know what's happening in your local waterways, NY Alert is the place to look. You can sign up for notices in your area, and if I'm not mistaken, that can be in the form of text or email. So what are we doing about this? This is an issue. There is a regulatory framework you ought to know about. These systems are regulated. It's not just the Wild West out there. Every combined sewer system in New York State is required to operate under what's called a SPDES permit, and that's SPDES. That's the State Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. I know, it's a mouthful. And it's New York's version of the federal permitting program established under the Clean Water Act. Think of it as a legal operating license. You can't just dump sewage into a waterway and shrug it off. You need a permit, and that permit comes with conditions to keep people safe. Under a SPDES permit, communities with combined sewers are required to meet a bunch of different best management practices. These are concrete operational requirements designed to reduce how often these overflows happen and how much pollution they release when they do. These aren't just friendly suggestions. They're conditions. Things like maintaining and inspecting their systems, maximizing how much flow gets sent to the plant after storms, prohibiting dry weather overflows entirely, right? You have no excuse for dumping raw sewage into our rivers if stormwater wasn't the cause. Duh. And replacing combined sewers with separate systems whenever that infrastructure gets upgraded. But permits aren't alone to fix a problem this large. That's why the EPA's 1994 CSO control policy went further and required every community with a combined sewer system to develop something called a long-term control plan, or LTCP. This is essentially a comprehensive engineering roadmap. A community has to evaluate their entire system, figure out how it behaves during storm events, and then identify and commit to a series of improvements that will eventually eliminate CSO discharges. Every community in New York State that was required to develop one has submitted their plan to the DEC, and most are still in the middle of implementing it. So what does the implementation actually look like? What are we doing about it? The options range in scale and cost. At the larger end, you have full sewer separation, digging up the combined pipes in your city and replacing them with two separate systems, one for sewage and one for stormwater. That's the most effective solution, but also the most expensive, often running into the hundreds and millions or even millions of dollars for one city. Other approaches include building large underground storage tanks that can hold all this extra water during a storm event and then release it slowly to a treatment plant afterward, expanding the plant's capacity to handle all that water. And using green infrastructure, rain gardens, permeable pavement, green roofs, to reduce how much stormwater enters the system in the first place. The DEC also requires communities to track and report their progress every single year through an annual report, and New York State compiles all of that into another report that is publicly available. So the data exists, the accountability structure exists. The question is whether the funding and the timeline can keep pace with the problem. And there's one more thing worth knowing if you walk along a waterway near an older city. By law, every CSO outfall in New York is required to be marked with a sign alerting the public that the water nearby may be contaminated with untreated sewage after a rainfall event. If you've ever seen one of those signs and wondered what it meant, now you know. And now you understand the entire system, the regulatory framework, and what we're doing about it. So what does this mean for you now? It means after a heavy rain event, the water can change. The lake can and will recover. It's not dangerous to swim in forever, so no need to panic. But it does need a little bit of time to manage those pollutants, usually a couple of days before the natural systems in place can resolve it. And if you want to know if something is actively happening in your river, lake, or watershed, look up local alerts. And if you're in New York, NY Alert. That's where the discharge notifications are required to be posted by law. Beyond that, there are things you can do in your own property that do actually matter. Keeping a layer or buffer of natural vegetation, like plants and such, between your lawn and the water's edge, if you live on lakefront, can slow that runoff down before it reaches the lake to begin with. And it will drop out all of those fertilizers, contaminants, chemicals, sediments, and keep it out of our drinking water. Reducing or eliminating fertilizers on your lawn reduces the nutrients entering the waterways. Trust me, your lawn does not need to be neon green. And your lawn color matters a hell of a lot less than your drinking water. It amazed me as an inspector how many people complained about blooms on their lakefront properties, but then I would see them out there in a couple of weeks spraying lawn fertilizer. They're directly contributing to the problem they were complaining about. It drives me nuts. Also, if you've ever wondered whether a rain barrel or a rain garden would make a difference, they do. These aren't just feel-good gestures. They're small-scale versions of the same principles that make forests work. But here's a larger point I want you to leave with. The next time you see a lake turn green, or a beach get closed, or a sign that says don't swim here after rain, you'll know why. You'll know about the water rushing off the pavement, the pipes overwhelmed beyond capacity, the mix of runoff and sewage arriving with no filter, no treatment, and nowhere to go except in. That knowledge matters, because you can't solve a problem or talk about a problem you don't understand. And most people have never had this explained to them. But now you have. Next time on Aqua Diary, we're going to take a look at what happens inside the lake once all of those nutrients arrive. Harmful algal blooms. How lakes process pollution, why some recover, why others don't, and what all of that actually means. I'm Allie, and thanks for listening.